Welcome to Powerless to Powerful with Angela Bennett, a show that brings a sassy mix of transformative advice on health, relationships, love, career, and mindset shifting, together with some fun and laughter. Powerless to Powerful with Angela Bennett begins now. Hello and welcome to Powerless to Powerful with Dr. Angela Bennett and my special guest, Toya Bond. Toya is a legal support professional, radio personality, and a small business owner. She is also the host of Speaking of Love podcast, created in honor of her father who took his own life in a murder-suicide. Since the tragedy, Toya has become an advocate for mental health and suicide prevention. As a minority woman, Toya is nationally recognised by Black Women in Radio, BWIR, for her outstanding and influential contributions to Black radio culture and digital media around the globe. Before switching career paths, Toya worked as a school office administrator for nearly 2 decades. In 2017, she was awarded the National Life Changer of the Year award for positively impacting the lives of her students. Wow. Toya is also the Executive Board Secretary for the Down Syndrome Guild of Southeast Michigan. She is a respected community leader who believes that spreading love is the secret to her success. Wow, Toya Bond, it is such an honor and a privilege to have you on this show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Dr. Angela.
Thank you. I will just say before we go any further that there is sensitive, or there may be topics and conversations that some of you may find sensitive or hopefully not triggering. But if so, please reach out either to Toya or myself or someone within your community who can help you with whatever comes up for you. You are not alone we don't want you to be alone in what's coming out and what we're about to discuss, because it is such a sensitive topic. So please know that we are here to support you in every way that we can. Toya, on that note, I will hand it over to you and you can just give us a little bit more of a rundown of who you are, if you like.
Well, as you mentioned, thank you, Dr. Angela. I am Toya Bond. I live here in Detroit, Michigan, and I wear a lot of different hats. But tonight, we're going to talk more about my advocacy work in the area of suicide prevention. The way I became involved with suicide prevention is in March of 2020. My father took his own life in a murder-suicide. And since the tragic passing of my dad, I have dedicated my life to finding out the cause of suicide. What is suicide? I was like on a crazed mission to find my dad's killer. So to take it back a little bit further, on the evening of March 2nd, my dad and his wife were both found deceased in their condominium. It was a murder-suicide. My father murdered his wife, and then moments later, he took his own life. And the couple had only been married for 9 months. So, of course, after receiving the news of something so tragic, it forever changed my life, and it led me on the path that I'm on today. And for the last 3 years, I have been studying suicide, the science behind it, the causes of it, and I've joined support groups. I am now sitting on the board of directors for a nonprofit dedicated to ending suicide. I go around globally and I speak to people on different platforms on the subject of suicide prevention. And my mission is just to hopefully create a world where suicide no longer exists.
Oh, amen. Wouldn't that be a beautiful world? Gosh.
Yes, it would.
Thank you for sharing your story, Toya, and I'm so sorry for your loss. However, I'm so grateful for you doing the research that you've done. I'm sure that you have had an impact on so many lives since then.
Yeah.
So I'm interested. I'll ask you a couple of questions and we can just open up the discussion here. So, what typically motivates through your study that you've learned? What typically motivates individuals to commit such an act as suicide and or murder suicide?
Well, suicide is such a complicated subject matter. I know that suicide is a disease of the mind and not a disease of the brain. So when people take their own lives, it could be for a multitude of reasons. It could be a history of depression. 90% of people who die by suicide have a diagnosable mental illness, and you're far more likely to encounter someone having suicidal thoughts than you are to having someone who's in a cardiac arrest. So just to let you know, suicide is very common and it's not talked about. There's a negative stigma behind suicide, so people don't really want to discuss it, but it's a conversation that really needs to be had because last year in the United States alone, 47,000 people died by suicide. In our country, every 11 minutes, someone dies by suicide. So, what that means, Dr. Angela, is by the time we get done recording this podcast here, we will have lost at least 3 more people, depending on how long this podcast goes. So, it's a very sensitive subject matter, and we need to bring more awareness to it. So back to your question, some of the things could be depression, anxiety, loss of a loved one, loss of a relationship, loss of a job, lack of proper coping skills. There are a number of factors that could lead to someone wanting to take their own life. And I've also learned that as a suicide loss survivor, I am now at a greater risk of taking my own life by suicide as well. So it's very complicated.
So, out of curiosity, why does that make you a greater risk of taking your own life?
Because when you lose someone by suicide, the way that I lost my dad, there's a desire for a reunion, for a longing to want to be with that person. When a person dies by suicide, they leave their family with unanswered questions, regret, guilt. So all of those factors can lead you to want to reunite with your loved one. And it's not uncommon that people who've lost someone very close to them by suicide will one day themselves commit suicide. My father, let's take him for example. When he was in his 20s, his very best friend took his own life after a relationship ended with a girlfriend. So that was my dad's best friend. He took his own life. He died by gunfire. And if you fast forward maybe 20 years later, my cousin, which was my dad's favorite nephew, he took his own life by suicide. So my dad would always crack jokes about suicide. And I realized now that there was an element of truth to his sarcasm. Uh, he used a lot of humor to mask his pain.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I guess maybe you can talk about. Thank you for sharing that, and just going along with that, maybe you can share some ways that roles that people can play, so friends, family, community members can play in preventing a murder suicide from occurring. Because if we know about these statistics, and we know, and we'll discuss more about statistics in a sec, because 47,000 people a year, did you say?
Nearly 47,000 people in the United States alone.
United States,
Yeah,
every
only in the
11,
United States alone. So just imagine globally
yeah,
what the number is. Yeah.
yeah, every 11 minutes we lose a person. That's too many people, way too many people, way
Mm-hmm.
too often. So is there something, that a role that we can play in preventing a murder suicide in general from occurring?
Well, the one thing that you can do, Dr. Angela, is just be present.
Mm.
Recognize your loved ones and your friends and people who are close to you. Watch for the warning signs. If a person is exhibiting isolation, that's the biggest factor. If they're isolating themselves, they don't want to go out and do the things that they used to enjoy. If they're missing work, if they've lost their desire to go to school, they don't want to go to work, they're not showering, they've lost their zest for life. They're making jokes about suicide, or they're searching online for means of ways to end their life, giving away prized possessions. I spoke with a lady last week, and her husband took his own life, but just before he did, he gave away his class ring that he had had for like 40 years. He gave it to one of his sons. So, giving away prized possessions, things of that nature, those are all warning signs that the person may be reaching out for help.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you. And so I guess they would be some of the common warning signs or risk factors that you've just mentioned. Is there anything more that you'd like to add to that?
I'll be honest with you, Dr. Angela. This is no cookie cutter ingredient, because some people don't really exhibit any signs that we recognize. For example, with my dad, he would always joke about suicide. I would call him sometimes and say, "Hey, Dad, how was your day today?" And he'd go, "Oh, I had a rough day. I'm just looking for the Ambassador Bridge." And I would say, "Why are you looking for the bridge?" And he would say, "Oh, because I'm ready to jump." And we would laugh it off. It was a joke. But now, hindsight is 2020. I realize now that there was an element of truth to the joke. He really wanted to jump. So we
Yeah.
have to be careful of that.
Yeah. Oh, wow. So being present, I love that. Watching for warning signs, that's really great. And out of those 47,000 that are almost 47,000 that are committing suicide, do you know the percentage of men versus women?
Well, over half of that number is men. Men are far two times more likely to take their own lives than women. So yes, men are leading the way. Specifically in the United States, white males are far more likely to take their own lives than any other race of men.
Wow, white men.
Hmm.
So how can people, so when you say it's a disease of the mind and not the brain,
Hmm.
what can people do? I mean, is that, so that's depression. And so what else would it look like? I know that you said it's not a cookie cutter, but I guess,
Well, generally, people who die by suicide, 90% of them have been diagnosed with bipolar, depression, anxiety. All of that goes hand in hand. It could also be from substance abuse.
mm,
Uh, those are some of the factors there. But what I mean by it being a disease of the mind, it's not a defect with your brain. Like an aneurysm would be an effect of the brain. This is something that's caused by the human mind, your thought process, things that the disease, the depression, the anxiety is telling you: you're not worthy, you're not lovable, take your own life. So it's a disease of the mind, not so much a defect of the brain, if that makes sense.
yeah, I love that. That's really great. Thank you. And so is it heavily connected with domestic violence and financial stresses?
Yes, financial stresses, domestic violence, a lack of self love, all of that can contribute to a person not wanting to live anymore and taking their own lives.
Mm,
Hmm.
wow. And so moving on to maybe the psychological implications for survivors and loved ones that are affected by suicide. How do those around them, those that are left behind, how do they get on with life? Yeah.
That's the $1 million question. I will just speak for me, Dr. Angela. What I have done, the moment that I found out that my dad had took his own life and took his wife's life, I knew that I had to find out exactly what caused this. I went on a crazed mission to find the killer. It was like I became obsessed with suicide prevention. I created a YouTube playlist with suicide prevention videos. I purchased a lot of books. I started talking to people. I joined a support group. I read pamphlets. I wanted to know how this could happen. And so, as a means to survive for me, number one, I refuse to let my father die in vain. So I have created a podcast in his honor because I want my dad to be remembered for the man that he was and how he lived, and not specifically how he died. He did a horrible thing, he took someone's life. But I want to raise awareness because this could have been prevented if we had known what was going on, if we could have helped him, if we could have reached out. So what I have done to preserve my life is, it hasn't been easy, but I've created a podcast in his honor. So every Saturday morning, when I get up and I'm getting ready to record my podcast, it's like I'm on my way to a therapy session because I get to talk and connect with beautiful people like you, Dr. Angela, from all around the world, different walks of life, on the subject of love. Now, my podcast is called Speaking of Love because my dad was a radio TV broadcast engineer for many years, and he hosted a radio show years ago called Speaking of Sports. Well, I know nothing about sports, but I wanted to find a way to honor him. So I created the podcast, Speaking of Love. And so the way that we stay connected, when I'm interviewing people like you and I'm speaking live on the radio or on the podcast, it's almost like I'm walking in my dad's gift. So what I would tell your audience, if you've lost someone to suicide, the way that you stay connected to them is that you do something to honor that person's memory on a regular basis. My dad loved radio TV broadcasting engineer, so I'm a radio host, I'm a podcast host, and I'm walking in his gift. And if let's say your loved one took their own life and they loved apple pies, you can bake apple pies once a month and distribute them to people in your community as a way to honor your loved one. Stay connected to them. You can journal about your loved one. Create a picture collage, do something to honor their memory. My sisters and I, we're going to write a farewell letter to our dad, and we're going to go and meet at one person's house in a safe place, and we're going to read the letters out loud to each other. That is one way to also stay connected to your loved one who's no longer there, and just continue to fight. I mean, learn more about suicide prevention, become an advocate, let your voice be heard. They have lots of walks that you can participate in. Participate in a fundraising walk. Just do something to keep that person's memory alive. Don't let your loved one die in vain.
Oh, that is so beautiful, Latoya. Thank you for sharing that. Oh my gosh. And so, where can people find your Speaking of Love podcast while we're talking about it?
Speaking of Love podcast is available on all podcast platforms. You just Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, Spotify, iHeart Music, SoundCloud. You just type in Speaking of Love podcast in the search bar and it will appear. And the podcast is also, I have a page on Facebook, Speaking of Love podcast, and also on YouTube. I have Speaking of Love. So you'll find me. Google me.
Awesome. Awesome. So, you mentioned a YouTube playlist
Mm-hmm.
initially. What was that about? Can you tell us a little bit more about that, of the YouTube playlist of videos?
Well, there are a lot of people who have presented TED Talks on the subject of suicide prevention. And so I created a playlist with hundreds of people who are speaking live on the subject of suicide prevention. Whether it's a TED Talk, whether it's a high school counselor, whether it's other suicide prevention advocates. And I watch those videos, I study those videos because I don't have a degree in psychology. I'm not a doctor. So all of the information that I'm learning about suicide prevention, I am gathering it from other sources via the internet, whether I'm out in public, speaking at a venue. So this is how I've gained my education on suicide prevention. So that YouTube playlist is just a list, a series of videos that other people like me who've lost someone to suicide, they bring it to the forefront and they educate you on what the warning signs are, how to prevent it. And this is where I am.
Thank you for doing that. And what is that called? Is that on your speak about love? Sorry.
Well, the playlist is just my own personal playlist that's on my own YouTube channel. I don't think it's available to the public, but it's just a
Oh,
list of references that I refer to when I need information.
oh, I see what you mean.
But
Okay.
the information is available to anyone. If you know, YouTube is a powerful tool. They call it YouTube University. So if you go to YouTube and you type in the search bar suicide prevention speech, you're going to get hundreds of videos there. So you just grab the ones that resonate with you the most, and then you can create your playlist.
Okay. That's great. Thanks for sharing that information. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So, Latoya, how can mental health professionals best support individuals who are struggling with thoughts of suicide?
Okay, that's a good question, Dr. Angela. So the first thing that we must do is go to the person with love.
Mm,
Don't criticize them. Don't judge them. Uh, have them open up to you. So, what I would recommend, let's say you're at work, you have a coworker, and they just seem to be down and out. They're not themselves. That you notice their hygiene is not where it used to be. Just something's a little off with that person. Go to them and say, "Hi, Angela. I noticed you haven't been yourself lately. Are you okay?" And when you're speaking to this person, lower your voice. "Are you okay? You don't seem yourself." And let them get it out. They might say, "Oh, my husband divorced me. I can't pay my bills." And then after they give you a list of whatever it is, say to them, "Wow, when people are going through those types of things that you just mentioned, they often think of suicide. Are you thinking of suicide? Are you thinking of killing yourself?" Ask them directly, because studies show that if you beat around the bush, "Oh, are you thinking of harming yourself? You want to end your life?" Say the word suicide, because what you're doing is you're opening up the door for them to come to you and talk to you about what they've been thinking. Research has shown by asking the question directly, you're opening up the gateway for a conversation with them. And if they do say that they're having thoughts of suicide and that, yes, that is the answer, then your responsibility is to guide them and get them to the appropriate help, whether it be dialing the suicide hotline number or calling their doctor. Get them the help that they need and stay with them until the help arrives. I also want to tell you what not to do.
okay, great.
If you have a conversation with someone and they express to you that they have the desire to end their own life, they don't want to live anymore, "I'm going to kill myself, I want to commit suicide," the worst thing you can do is look at them and say, "Oh, come on now, you can't be that weak. Are you serious? You can't be thinking of suicide, are you? Oh my goodness." Don't do that, because if you talk to them that way, you're gonna build a wall between you and that person, and you may not be able to reach them. So just be gentle in your approach. Talk to them with love, and whatever the problem is, don't try to fix it. It's not your job to fix it, and you're not going to be able to fix it in that moment. So what you can do is guide them to the appropriate help, and they have to be willing to get the help in order for it to be done. So just at the end of the day, go to them with love, not judgment. You can't fix it for them, but just be a source of love. Open your heart, because people who feel loved are less likely to take their own lives.
Yeah.
So just be careful in your approach.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that to the forefront, both sides of that, what to do and what not to do, because I know for myself, actually mentioning the word suicide is not something that I normally would have done. So
Mhm.
thank you for that insight. It's really powerful. It's as though you give them permission to speak freely.
Yes, yes.
When
And it is harsh, because when I first learned about it and I heard that they recommended saying suicide, I was like, "Ooh, that's kind of, I don't know." But studies show that you just say the word. Don't be afraid. "Are you thinking of suicide?" And then you can maybe share a story with them. I had a neighbor years ago who took her own life. "Are you thinking of suicide?" It's not what you say, it's how you say it. and your voice inflection, because they're already in a broken place.
Yeah.
So if you go to them with a deep voice and a critical or judgmental, you're going to push them back, and you don't want to do that.
Yeah.
And then I do also want to offer, if the person is not willing to tell you what's going on, just stay in their presence. Like, okay, no, if the person says, no, I don't have any, I'm not thinking of suicide, I'm fine. Okay, well, listen, I'm here for you. I care about you. I just noticed something was off. And if you ever want to talk, I'm here. And then just kind of follow up with that person periodically. And if it's something there, they will eventually open up to you.
That is so good, Latoya. So good. Um, I know. Thank you for sharing. It's really powerful. I know with the stigma that comes around with suicide, there's a lot of people that think it's really selfish, and
Mm,
there's so much said about it. So many mixed emotions, and I think a lot of it is, dare I say, ignorance or misunderstanding. But what I know is this: I have attempted suicide myself, and one of the occasions, fortunately, thank God, his breath is still in my lungs. But
mm,
one of the occasions, I overdosed, and my experience when I was found and taken to the hospital, and the treatment that I received was really, I was an inconvenience. Like, how
mm,
dare I do such a thing? How dare I waste their time? There was no compassion. There was no empathy. They put me in a mental health ward once I was well enough to leave the hospital bed, and my children were there as well, and my ex-husband. Like, it was a horrible experience. And the whole thing was so tragic and horrible. And then to be treated like that when you're in your most vulnerable place,
mm,
when someone is in a space where, I'm just going to be careful the words I use. When someone is in a space where they get to the point that this is it, I'm going to do it. If someone can meet them with love and compassion rather than ridicule and judgment, like you were just saying, it would have made such a difference.
it helps. It helps.
Yeah, yeah, it would have helped a lot. And even, when we need to ask for help, it's not because, like, we ask for help in those weak moments so we can
Hmm.
remain strong. It's not,
Yes.
it's not, there's nothing to be said, nothing wrong with putting your hand up and going, oh my gosh, I need help right now. It's okay not to be okay, but don't
Hmm.
stay here and do this by yourself, because, as you were saying, the disease of the mind, once those voices or emotions take over, it's so hard. My experience was, it was so hard to pull myself, virtually impossible to pull myself out of the depths of this dark pit that I found myself in, that I just thought everyone around me was better off without me.
Sure. And that was the depression and whatever you were going through.
Yeah.
The disease, that's the disease telling you things that are not true. And
Yeah.
so because you have a disease of the mind, how can you get that help alone? Just like if I came to you, Dr. Angela, and I said, I have a kidney disease. I'm dying from kidney disease. You wouldn't look at me and say, wow, you are so selfish. You have kidney disease? Because having suicidal thoughts and the disease of the mind, it's a disease. So it's no different from a person having, my boyfriend, he has congestive heart failure, he has a heart disease. I mean, if he died today, would I look at him and say, you're selfish bastard, you? No, I wouldn't say that, because he
Yeah.
has a disease. And suicide is the exact same. The person is not well, they're sick. So you
Yeah.
can't judge them because they're not well.
Mm. Oh, that's so good. Oh, so good. Okay, well, is there anything else you'd like to share on this
I
topic?
would just like to say to your audience, Dr. Angela, if for those who can hear my voice, I'm going to get closer to my microphone right now. If you're listening to the sound of my voice right now, and life has gotten the best of you, you're tired, you don't want to live anymore, you feel like the world would be a much better place without you, please know that those thoughts that you're having are not real. That's your sadness. That's your depression. That's a culmination of all the hurt and pain that you've been through in your life talking to you, but it's not real. So, what I want you to do is get help. Speak to someone you trust. Dial the suicide prevention helpline. Talk to someone who can help you because your existence on earth has a divine purpose and you matter. You are loved. You are everything. You're whole. Right now, you're just a little broken. When my dad took his own life, I was broken. But here I sit before you 3 years later, and I'm better because I stayed awake. So stay awake for the rebirth. Every morning that you wake up, you're rebirthing a new day. My father and his wife died on a Monday. I often ask myself, what would life have been like for my dad if he had stayed awake one more day? Tuesday would probably be a lot different from Monday. So please stay awake, stay alive. You are loved and you are here on earth for a divine purpose.
Oh, amen.
Mhm.
Amen. Thank you for sharing that. That I can't think of a better way to close this out.
Thank
Um,
you. Thank you for allowing me this space to do this. This is helpful to me. It's therapeutic for me. Losing my dad in such a horrible way, it's changed my life. But I live with a lot of hurt, pain, regret because I wasn't there to save him at a time when he needed help. So thank you for this opportunity and helping me along my journey of grief.
Thank you so much. And I just want to acknowledge that it's only been a couple of years for you, and you have blown my mind by your ability to be here, to show up, to be able to have this conversation with us. And it obviously comes from a depth of love for people, love
Mhm.
and concern and compassion. And I love this being awake. Stay
Yeah,
awake.
stay awake for the rebirth. This is my dad behind me in this photograph. My dad and I, we took this picture on his 40th birthday. Oh, no, I'm sorry, my 40th birthday. We took the picture together at his apartment. And one of my viewers had this beautiful painting made of us. And I often look at the photograph and I just turn to my dad and I say, I hope I make you proud.
Yeah, I'm sure. Oh my gosh. I know that he would be. I know
Yeah.
he'd be so proud of you. I don't doubt that for a minute. It
Yeah,
has
it's
been.
not easy.
No, I can imagine. And I just honor you for everything that you're doing and bringing to the world, shedding light on this sensitive topic, but so necessary. I've actually reached out to a friend of mine who is a counselor, and he is part of an organization called Talk to Me Bro.
Mm.
And it was formed from a wife who lost her husband to suicide. And
Aw.
it's huge now. And he and I are about to start a podcast confronting head on issues that men face, that they're too either ashamed or nervous or embarrassed or unsure who to talk to, but to have like a roundtable discussion of the realities of life, because a lot of these realities are human realities. They're not gender specific. They're not, this is how a man feels and this is how a woman feels. It's not that. It's,
Mhm.
sadness, stress, financial pressure. These are loss and grief. These are human attributes, human emotions that we all experience,
Mm-hmm.
and opening up the platform and a safe space for men to have conversations is,
Yes, definitely. It's
yeah,
it's much needed. It really is needed.
it's really
And
important.
and as long as we're living and we're a part of the human experience, we're going to experience loss. That's you can't you're going to inevitably lose someone you love in life, and it's a great possibility that you will lose someone that you love from suicide, whether it's a friend, a neighbor, a husband, a child. It's going to happen. Just keep living.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Latoya Bond. You are amazing. God bless you in everything you put your hand to.
Thank
And
you.
and maybe we'll even get you on as a guest of that podcast once it's
Oh
up and
yes.
running.
Yes, I would definitely love to do that. Yes.
You.
And I'm
That,
also writing a book called Speaking of Love. So, if your audience, if I could talk a little bit about the book,
please.
it's gonna be a guide for suicide prevention, and it's a suicide loss survivors guide of hope, healing, and love. And it's going to be released on May 25th, which would have been my dad's 70th birthday. So the book is available on Amazon, and it's called Speaking of Love. Speaking of Love, a suicide loss survivor's guide to hope and healing. And you can pre-order the Kindle version today, but the paperback version will be released on May 25th.
All right. So pre-order today. Speaking of love.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm going to go and get that on the Kindle. Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, beautiful. And maybe once maybe once the book is released, we'll get you back on anyway. That would be perfect timing with the podcast and your book and everything.
Thank you.
Perfect. Okay. Have an amazing day or evening. Sorry, what's left for you?
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank,
Dr. Angela.
thank you, Latoya. Follow Angela on Facebook and LinkedIn at Angela Bennett, on Instagram at AngieB_transformations, or visit angieb.com.au. And remember, your past does not define you, it refines you.